We are coming to you in the hours after the longest night this conflict has produced. And what daylight is revealing across Israel right now is something that no official statement, no carefully worded press release, and no damage assessment prepared in a government briefing room can soften into something manageable. The sun has risen over Israel, and what it is illuminating is the aftermath of the single most destructive night of this war. The videos arriving now are different from the videos that have defined this conflict until today. The previous footage, the nighttime strikes, the explosions against dark skies, the fires visible across city skylines, carried the chaos and urgency of events unfolding in real time. What is arriving this morning carries something else, something quieter and in many ways more devastating. Daylight footage, clear skies, and beneath those clear skies, the full, unobstructed extent of what last night produced. Collapsed structures, streets buried under debris fields that were, 12 hours ago, functioning urban corridors. Vehicles crushed beneath building facades that no longer exist. Entire city blocks reduced to the kind of rubble that takes heavy equipment days to clear and forensic teams weeks to fully account for. And people moving through all of it, rescue workers, residents who survived, first responders who have been working through the night and are still working now, surrounded by a scale of destruction that the human eye processes differently in daylight than it does through the orange glow of fire at 3 in the morning. This morning, Benjamin Netanyahu stood before cameras and said something that Israeli leaders have avoided saying with this degree of directness throughout this entire conflict. He said it was a very difficult night. Those words, from a leader whose public posture across decades of conflict has been built on projecting resolve, on communicating to the Israeli public and to Israel's adversaries that the state will absorb what is thrown at it and respond with overwhelming force, carry a weight that their brevity conceals. A very difficult night. In the language of Israeli wartime leadership, that phrase is not understatement for rhetorical effect. It is an admission. An acknowledgement that what occurred last night exceeded the threshold that official communications normally manage with more distance and more control. That the footage, the casualty figures, and the physical reality of what is now visible in daylight cannot be contained within the framing that has sustained Israeli public communications throughout this conflict. When Netanyahu says it was a very difficult night, he is telling you that the systems failed, the missiles arrived, and the damage is real in a way that he cannot ask his public to look away from. The casualty figures are still being compiled. That sentence, still being compiled, is itself a statement about scale. In previous waves of this conflict, Israeli emergency services and the National Trauma Registry were able to produce preliminary casualty numbers within hours of a strike. The compilation process was fast because the events, while serious, were bounded. They had edges. This morning, the compilation process is not fast. The numbers are still moving upward as rescue teams reach impact sites that were inaccessible overnight, as hospitals process arrivals that overwhelmed intake systems in the early hours, as the full geographic spread of last night's strikes becomes clear in the light that darkness withheld. Many wounded. That is what Israeli officials are saying this morning. Many wounded, with the full accounting still incomplete. Now let us address what last night actually was in military terms. Because understanding the scale of what occurred requires moving beyond the footage and into the operational picture that produced it. Last night was not a single wave in the sequence that has defined Iranian missile operations throughout this conflict. It was a simultaneous, multi-axis, multi-system assault conducted across a geographic spread that stretched from the northern theater to the Negev in the south, and from the coastal cities to the inland population centers. Not one direction, not one system, not one target category. Everything, everywhere, at the same time. The architecture of a multi-axis simultaneous assault is specifically designed to defeat layered missile defense in a way that sequential waves cannot. When missiles arrive from a single direction against a single target area, the defense system concentrates. It brings all available intercept capacity to bear against a defined threat vector. It manages its interceptor inventory against a calculable demand. The mathematics of that engagement are difficult, but not impossible. When missiles arrive simultaneously from multiple directions against multiple target areas spread across hundreds of kilometers of defended territory, the mathematics change entirely. every Patriot battery, every Iron Dome installation, every arrow launcher in the Israeli order of battle must engage simultaneously against threats arriving from different vectors at different speeds along different trajectories. The interceptor inventory, already depleted by the sustained operational tempo of this conflict, must be divided across all those simultaneous engagements rather than concentrated against any single one. And the radar networks that feed targeting data to those interceptors must track, calculate, and prioritize across an engagement picture whose complexity exceeds what they were designed to manage at this scale and simultaneity. What last night did to the Israeli missile defense architecture was not defeated in the conventional sense of destroying its hardware. It defeated it mathematically. It presented a simultaneous demand that exceeded the available supply of interceptors, of radar capacity, of engagement bandwidth. And the missiles that fell through the gaps in that exceeded capacity are what the daylight footage is now showing. The Patriot PAC-3 MSE is not a failed system in isolation. Against any individual threat within its design parameters, it performs with high reliability. What it cannot do, what no point defense system in existence can do, is be everywhere at once. Last night, Iran required it to be everywhere at once, and it was not, because it cannot be, because that is not a failure of the system. It is a fundamental limit of the physics and economics of missile defense when an adversary has sufficient missile inventory to overwhelm the intercept capacity of any architecture that can realistically be fielded. Iran has that inventory. Last night demonstrated it, and the daylight footage is the evidence. There is a human dimension to what the morning videos are showing that the military and strategic analysis must not be allowed to crowd out entirely. The people visible in that footage, the ones moving through the debris fields, the ones sitting in the rubble of what were their homes, the ones being carried on stretchers toward ambulances that were not designed to process this volume, are Israeli civilians, not soldiers, not defense contractors, not officials with access to the decision-making processes that produced this conflict. People who lived in apartment buildings and worked in offices and sent their children to schools that may or may not still be standing this morning. People who were told by their government and by its American partner that the defense systems covering their cities were adequate to the threat. Last night was the verdict on that assurance, and the verdict is visible in every frame of footage that daylight is now producing. For the American administration, this morning's footage and Netanyahu's admission create a political environment in Washington that is qualitatively different from anything this conflict has produced previously. Every previous difficult night in this conflict was followed by official American statements that acknowledged the severity while reasserting the effectiveness of the joint U.S.-Israeli response. The framing held, imperfectly but functionally, because the footage, while serious, was manageable enough that the framing did not visibly collapse against the evidence. This morning, the framing cannot hold against the footage. When an allied head of government stands in front of cameras and says it was a very difficult night, when the daylight videos show the scale of what a very difficult night produced, the official American narrative of controlled conflict, of winning decisively, of an operation proceeding within manageable parameters, is not a narrative that any spokesperson can sustain with a straight face against what is on those screens. The congressional pressure that this footage will generate, the questions from allied governments that have been supporting this operation and now face their own domestic political environments, processing images of Israeli cities in daylight ruin. The defense industry scrutiny of Patriot and Iron Dome performance data across the full operational record of this conflict. All of that begins today, not as a theoretical future consequence, as an immediate, concrete political reality that the administration must manage while the conflict continues. And the conflict continues. That is the other dimension of this morning that must be addressed directly. Iran is not finished. The scale of last night's assault does not represent an inventory exhausted or a military will spent. It represents a capability demonstrated. An adversary that can mount a simultaneous multi-axis assault of last night's scale and sustain it long enough to produce what the daylight footage is showing did not empty its magazines to do it. It proved something. It proved that when it decides to commit to a single night's operation at full capacity, the result is what you are watching on your screens this morning. That proof is now the baseline for every calculation Israel, the United States, and every regional actor makes about what Iran is capable of delivering in a single operational window, and the strategic implications of that baseline for ceasefire negotiations, for escalation decisions, for the question of where this conflict goes from a morning that looks like this, are implications that no one on any side of this conflict was prepared to manage before last night. Netanyahu said it was a very difficult night. The footage says it was a night that changed what this conflict is. And the daylight that is now revealing the full extent of what Iran delivered in the darkness will not be the last daylight to reveal consequences that the architects of this operation did not adequately account for. The casualties are still being counted. The rubble is still being cleared. The full picture of last night is still emerging, and what that picture shows when it is complete will be studied in capitals, in war colleges, in intelligence agencies, and in the homes of the people who lived through it for a very long time. We will not leave this coverage. Stay with us.